Hi and welcome to what will be the last in the video series of Vadi by the Source. All of the major videos have concluded, as you probably saw from the fact that the last one ended up with the phrase at the end. I wanted to just do a final couple videos to sort of wrap everything up and kind of conclude everything together. So in this video, I want to just try and unpick a bit what was done for Vadi by the Source. I want to go through a little bit about the process of how I made it, some of the insights that kind of gave me into both my own fencing and sort of other people's fencing and fencing theory in general. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of what's been covered, what percentage of Vadi's been covered, and sort of where the videos were drawn from, so people can understand, at least in a bit more detail, what have you watched? What have you spent the last 6 months watching? I'm very glad to have gotten here. I'm not normally someone who's very good at completing projects. It was very helpful for me to have a weekly deadline. And actually it was very useful for me to have COVID, because it meant that I had a lot of time lying around doing nothing and I could just dig through and find some clips to use and sort of queue things up. 6 months of videos equates to, we had 25 videos that were showing clips, and then a few videos that talked about the intro video and this one, as well as one last one coming up that I'll talk about at the end. So one interesting question is, how much of the book did we cover? Okay, first thing to give you an impression, this here, what I have here, is a facsimile produced by the guy Windsor. This is no translation, no text, apart from the originals. Essentially, it is just scans of the original text, produced in high quality. Okay, there's no translation, there's no commentary, and it essentially is the size of the original source. Okay, so as you can see, about a centimeter thick, including the hardcover, A5 paper, not exactly a huge book. I didn't cover everything from the book. Particularly for a start, we only looked at longsword, which is the first half. Okay, longsword comes to about here. This is sort of the end of the longsword section. And even from the longsword section, I probably only covered about 3/4 of the work itself. So what did I not talk about? What did I not show? I think the most substantive thing that I didn't cover, and probably the most important concept that we see a lot in Vadi, but I found no way I could show it in video, is the link between measure and tempo. So Vadi talks about measure, the distance and the judgment of distance between ourselves and our opponent, and tempo, the actions that we are performing, the actions of our opponent performing, as two things that go hand in hand. And this is the idea that we at all times need to have a clear conception of what are the actions that I can perform and what are the actions that my opponent can perform with this variable measure that's coming in and how that affects it. I couldn't think how I could explain that with a video. Okay, it kind of permeates every single action, but when it goes right, it's just a successful action. So there wasn't really any way I found of sort of showing that concept beyond, in some senses, every single clip, because it's a successful action of some kind, shows that concept. So that was probably the most substantive thing that I didn't cover. The second most substantive thing I didn't cover was the guards. And I kind of talked a little bit about guards. I talked about how guards are used as sort of waypoints of actions. I didn't show any specific guards. Vadi shows 12. I think if you read the text carefully, you can probably infer 3 of them additional, so a total of 15 guards. But Vadi says very little. Okay, the guard section is incredibly brief. Apart from, you essentially have per page an image, right? As you can see, there's 2 lines of text per guard, 4 guards per page. The other 2 lines of text for each guard. The first line basically just says the name of the guard, and the second line gives some information about it. What that information is and the quality of that information varies greatly. Sometimes I think he's telling us something which is surprising about the guard, but not really as common usage. Other times he's telling us essentially, yeah, this guard's good, use it, it's cool. So showing that again in video, while I have video footage that covers usage of every single guard, showing the specific one-liner that he gives us was the challenge that I couldn't realize. Plays is probably another area where we skipped over quite a lot. One of my friends, Alex, asked me, where's play 1 and 3? What's happened? And I can't see those videos. I do not have video footage of me doing every single play. It's the short version of it. So of the 25 plays, only, well, about a third of them are not safe to do in sparring or tournament anyway, right? They involve you breaking limbs. Most of the time we take throws out, so throws are out of the equation, so they involve throwing to the floor. And as a result, I don't have any sparring or tournament footage of me doing those plays. So those were never going to come in. Of the remaining sort of 2/3 of plays, we've got about half of them. The ones that we've mostly got are ones where you are essentially letting go with your left hand, grabbing or shoving or controlling the blade or body with that hand, and then striking with the right or disarming with the right. I didn't have other ones, or where I had some footage. There's a lot of other ones where you are grabbing your own sword, modern term half swording. I have some footage of some of them, but none of it is good footage. It's all, I get there and the process where I'm changing to that position, my opponent's body or my body is directly in line of sight, and you essentially see nothing. So I probably have 3 or 4 more plays that I have some footage of. So still not all of them, but the footage was crap. And the other ones, they don't come up as often for me, so I don't have as much footage of them. So this was sort of an artifact of the nature of some of the plays, sort of an artifact of the nature of some of my footage, and the fact that the ones we did see are the ones that I use the most, which is why it's more likely that I'm going to get good footage of it. What else did we miss? Okay, from the text chapters, we actually covered most of the substantive content. The things I skipped over. There's some footwork advice in chapters 10 and 11. It didn't really show that. I decided not to bother. The advice itself is pretty opaque. It's very difficult to kind of work out what's going on in the advice he gives us. Likewise, sort of seeing how it relates to the fencing is quite challenging. So I couldn't work out a way of getting a good video that showed it, so I skipped it. I skipped over essentially all the advice in the Defense Against the Rising Blow chapter. This chapter is all about a fencer. You have a hypothetical opponent who specializes by making alternating rising strikes. I did not really have any opponents that were that fencer. So, I mean, whether I would be able to, put out the chapter in a fencing context in that situation is a different story as well. But the situation wasn't there to apply it. So I've got no footage of it, so I couldn't show it. So we skipped over that chapter in its entirety. There's some more niche examples that I just don't have footage of as well. So particularly the fighting against multiple opponents. Maybe one day, next time I teach it, perhaps I'll try and get some filming and I'll try and revisit that. But for now, I've got no video footage to teach it, so I couldn't do it. And the other sort of broad thing we skipped over was Vadi's kind of social commentary, talking about who should fence, honoring your teacher, not going out and fighting people. Just not really something that makes any sense at all in the context of a tournament where we are deliberately fighting each other. So again, not there for obvious reasons. And then there's some odd places where either the advice is very vague, so difficult to relate to the screen, or very specific, so unless you've got this one exact circumstance, the advice doesn't apply, and just the situation didn't come up for those, so those are skipped as well. All told, of the longsword section, at least 2/3, maybe 3/4 of the book was covered, which I think is a fairly substantive piece for the amount of fencing that we showed. In total, it's about 9 minutes of fencing there. Okay, so 9 minutes of fencing in a variety of situations, and we've showed 75% of the book. Of course, in a fencing match, there'll be a lot more downtime between the exchanges. So this is 9 minutes of exchanges rather than 9 minutes of sort of fencing. But still, there's not a lot of fencing footage to produce 75% of the book. Moving on, I'd like to talk a bit about sort of where I drew the clips from, who my opponents were, and sort of the nature of the fencing that you were seeing. So I think there's this sentiment that we see a lot where the idea people have is that you use your pretty fencing in the pools when you're fencing bad opponents, and then you drop it when you get to the eliminations or the finals, because the person you're fencing is too good and you've got to focus on good rather than pretty fencing. That was not my experience in producing this, actually, not at all. So in terms of where the clips were drawn from, the nature of the fencing varied quite a lot. Some of them were just kind of end of class sparring with my students and my fellow instructors. Some of it was kind of more intense sparring at Vadi sparring group. Others were tournament. And I think it was probably about 2/3 tournament to 1/3 sparring. And from the tournament footage, yes, there was footage from pools, but it went right away from pools all the way to finals. So this is kind of the full spectrum of free play. Had various different things within this. In terms of my opponents, I went through, I was curious actually, I didn't really consciously think about who I was fencing in most of the clips I was pulling from, but I decided to take a look at it. And of the 90-ish clips that I used, more than half of them were against somebody who had at least one medal under their belt. In longsword, typically as well. So that meant that this is stuff that's being applied against good fencers. This is not just me being a flash against beginners and sort of showing off. This is me actually fencing against someone who is a good fencer and sort of showing how things work. And as I said earlier, some of the clips are from finals, right? So this is not just from early stages where we were mucking around or trying to look flash. This is from final fights in many cases as well. The process of getting the clips themselves, I think, is probably the most interesting thing to discuss. And it really told me something actually about how fencing goes. Perhaps wasn't fully surprising, but it certainly I wasn't going into expecting it. I came up with the order of the quotes from a specific sequence from the book, right? It was a logical sequence. It wasn't driven by the videos, and then I would go and try and find the clips. So one thing that I noticed was that often a single fight would be producing multiple exchanges that demonstrated the same principle that I was trying to show, which you probably can notice actually from some of the videos where the same fight comes up sort of 3 times in one video and then never comes up again. Generally speaking, that's because I'm reacting to my opponent, right? My opponent's doing something, which means that the particular principle is the relevant one for that fight, and so it's the one that I'm bringing to the table. I didn't find, for instance, that in the same tournament, the same concepts would be coming up multiple times. So what that meant was this was very much opponent dependent rather than me on the day behaving in a particular fashion. Related to that, one thing I found, there's a few videos where I was just like, okay, for this one I really want to get from a final fight, or I really want to get my clips from a really top end fight. So I would select the fights I wanted to draw from before trying to look for the clips. Almost invariably when I tried to do that, I failed, right? Because whatever fights I chose, I'd look at them and then there'll be plenty of good fencing in there, and there'll be plenty of other clips that could demonstrate for other principles, but trying to find a specific principle and say, okay, this is the one that I want to find from this fight, that was really challenging. Presumably because my opponent wasn't giving me the situation. So what's interesting about this is that when we think about our own fencing and sort of our sort of tactical plan and what we're kind of trying to do going into a sparring match or a tournament match or whatever it happens to be, is going into it with a plan of action is probably going to fail, right? If we come into it and say, all right, in this fight, I'm going to focus on disarms, or in this fight, I'm going to focus on exploring tempo or exploiting specifically this tempo, your opponent might just not give you the situations you require in order to bring that to the table. So there is definitely going to be a reactive nature to some of these things in that you need to choose the tool that is relevant to your situation rather than choose a tool and then try and force or find the situation or force the situation to be. That's not saying, particularly in sparring, it's always a bad idea to go in with a plan. I do this in sparring a lot. I say, okay, today I want to focus on this. From a sparring perspective, it's a great exercise. If you're practicing something specific, you're trying to look for those situations where it will be useful. But you'll probably end up being a worse fencer in that sparring match for it at the sacrifice. That's the sacrifice you make for learning games effectively. You're treating it as an exercise rather than a real fight or a tournament match or whatever. But if you are just trying to win, if that is your goal, going in with too much of a plan, actually, that might be a bad idea because your opponent isn't going to be giving you the reactions that you want. So I hope that some other people that do different systems or do the same system, do Vadi as well, might try and do something similar, okay? I really like making it. It was really useful for me to have such a focused lens on my own fencing to really look at what was going well there, what didn't go well there. you know, that itself means I would be very hopeful other people would do it. I also want to see the results from other people to see what they've got similar, and to maybe show it for other fencing systems, not just Vadi. Although of course Vadi is the best one, so we have more of that, please. Connor, I'm looking at you. So how would you go about doing that? The main thing practically for doing this is you need a lot of footage, right? And in a fight that has 10 exchanges, probably you've got 5 usable ones, and others 5 usable ones. Some of them might show you what you want, and some of them might not. So, you know, more footage the better if you want to get through this yourself. Well, I had some relatively simple, relatively inexpensive tools. I can't show it to you because I'm currently using it. I have a little simple, yay big phone stand for filming. So whenever I'm doing sparring, I can just plump it down somewhere. Sometimes the angle's bad, but you know, at least some of the footage will be useful. That gets you a lot of footage. I have a cheap 256 gigabyte SD card, which can store most of my video. Means not eating at me phone storage. That costs about 50 quid. The little stand costs about 20 quid. That's pounds in case you're not English, sorry, English pounds. And the software I used, the main one that I used for combining the video clips is called CapCut. It's an Android app. It's free, it's nice and simple, very, very straightforward for the basic editing that you need for this, which is basically taking a clip, rearranging it, putting them in order, adding some audio tracks over that. You can do all of that in app, which meant that I was able to arrange the clips at least and sort of prepare the videos kind of between things, right, between tasks. So if I was making a coffee, I could find the clips that I wanted and put them in, maybe do some of the recording, the voice recording for it. You know, it was very simple to kind of bring it all together. It didn't require any real technical skills or specialist knowledge of software. And then the final piece of software I used was called Bandicut. Bandicut lets you take a video and cut it up into smaller chunks. Really simple. Essentially, you load it and you select the timestamps and you say, okay, I'm done. That's it, right? And then I store them all on my OneDrive, and I basically just pull them down from there to my phone on the SD card and store them that way. The process of creating one of the videos, once I had the clips and the quotes sorted, probably took me about half an hour, okay? That's assuming I had clips that were there. Clips in my library that were useful for that particular concept. Maybe less than that, 20 minutes to half an hour. Getting the clips, yeah, that took a bit longer. Normally, when I've got footage, I'll just split it. But you know, making the clips takes about a minute for a video, if that, right? And then coming up with the quotes. The quotes weren't exactly from the book. Sometimes I had to adapt them slightly to make it more obvious what was going on the screen, because there's context cues from relevant bits in the book, sort of closely linked bits in the book that you don't have from the literal quote. So I had to kind of flesh that out. But preparing the quotes again wasn't that long, the order to it. So honestly, each of these videos, probably all told, half an hour to 45 minutes, total effort max. And you know, really very simple. You don't need to be a specialist in anything. So I would encourage you to do it as well. I hope you've enjoyed the series. I enjoyed making it. And I am looking for my next project. So if you have requests, if you made it this far in the video, you get to make requests. If you have any special requests in terms of things that you want to see, as I say, one of the things I'm thinking about doing already is more of those guard montages, so I can demonstrate how the guards are used. Anything else, anything you want me to talk about, elaborate. It doesn't have to be the same format, it can be something else. Pop in the comments for this video, and I can't promise I will do it, but I will certainly consider it. I sat down to do the editing and realized I've forgotten to say one very important thing, which is that there was one final video after this one. It should be published at the same time, but it'll be next to the series. Which is that I've taken all of the clips that I've used throughout the entire series and I've combined them, okay? This is the full speed clips, no editing. Some of them are a bit longer than you would have seen in the video because I'm showing the full clip rather than just the one specific bit I took for it. But it is all of them back to back, okay? Its total is about 9 minutes of fencing. Don't mind admitting it's some of the best fencing that I do. Funnily enough, I used the clips where I was doing well rather than the ones where I did something dumb and got stabbed in the face for it. And I'd be very interested to hear how easy it is for people who've watched the series to watch the clips and understand what specifically was being demonstrated by each of them. So go watch that. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching.